So this was really interesting. Before I start my dream, and it is very short, I have a tough time remembering my dreams. And last week on the 27th, I woke up and I instantly remembered 4 dreams at the same time. And so I quickly just mentally, said a few words to myself to help me remember, got out of bed and wrote those down, and I circled back and wrote them up. So that's really strange. It was an odd thing to have 4 things immediately come to mind. Wow. So here's the one that I picked. On a flat surface, there was a black and white photograph of Jesus stretched out on a cross. My vantage point was from the top right of his head, and his body was overlaying history, for there were markings of time on this photograph which continued well past his feet. Someone was measuring the distance with a ruler from the tip of one hand to the other. It was exactly 3 inches. Then they were to measure down that same amount from the top of his head, draw a line, and cut across the diagram as if cutting off history. I knew this was sinister and that it had to be stopped. And that's it.
So I'm trying to get the visual. He's overlaying like a timeline or like a calendar.
So on a table or a flat surface is what looks like a photograph, a black and white photograph, but it's very long. So I'm looking up here at his head, and his body is stretching away from me, and he's on the cross. And it just continues on, and there's markings on the photograph all the way down. And obviously his body's only so far, but the photograph keeps going, and it's supposed to be showing history. And somebody wants to measure from tip to tip of his hands on the cross. And they put a ruler on this photograph, and it's precisely 3 inches. And so they measure down from his head exactly 3 inches, and they're intending to draw a line and cut it off.
3 inches or 3 feet?
3 inches. Remember, this is just on a photograph.
Right.
So it's just the size of the picture.
It's a very small photograph.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It may be 5 inches wide or something, because it extended, it's black behind him, but he's on the cross, and like maybe white markings continuing on, designating time. And I don't know I don't know if it was years, centuries, decades.
So it's 3 inches from one tip of his hand to the other tip of his hand.
Yes.
And then they're going to measure down 3 inches from the top of his head.
Yep. They wanted to get that as a starting point, measure the 3 inches, and then that would determine how far down they wanted to measure, and then just cut it off.
So they wanted to cut him off whatever the length of his hands was.
The span of his arms.
And one thing that I thought of, I've always heard this, and I doubt this is exactly true. It's probably an approximate. I've heard before that if a person stretches out their arms and you measure from tip to tip, and this is a total stretch out, that is the same as their body height, and it's approximate.
It's a Michelangelo drawing. You ever see the one where the man is stretched out his arms and his legs are a little bit apart and he's drawn in a circle?
Yeah.
It's not ringing a bell.
Okay.
Yeah, it's yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's like yeah. I knew there was a rule of thumb related to that, but I wasn't sure what it looked like. But yeah.
For me, it just seemed like it was a simple dream, in that they just want to cut off Jesus from history,
Yeah.
In other words, for future generations, cut it off. as if he didn't exist. That's the only thing that came to my mind.
Or just that he would exist within his own
Time period.
yeah.
Mhm.
Be the
Yeah, I
best
think
way.
the fact that it's black and white, this is the black and white photo. It's simple. This issue that you're looking at is black and white. The fact that you're looking at Jesus from the top right cover over his head, it seems like you're looking down through time. You're looking down through him, down
Yep.
through time, down through history. So the span of 3 inches of his arm, and then you look down. There you go.
Yeah.
The 3 inches down from his head, which would put it somewhere around, well, would be
Close to his feet.
the full length of his body. So it's down to his feet. So you have the entire body of Jesus in there, not cut off. There's no part of him that's missing from this potential cutoff of his history. So Jesus, in essence, fills the entire span of history from start to finish, from head to toe.
Mm-hmm. Well, in this picture, the picture was longer than the cross and his body. It continued on.
So to go, would 3 inches have been farther down?
Like 3 inches would probably be at his feet, but history continued on.
Right.
The markings of history.
But connected to this picture.
What's that?
The markings of history continued connected to this picture.
Right. Picture a very long photograph.
Right.
That's very narrow, but very long.
And just the first part, the first couple of inches was Jesus, and then it just continued on.
Yeah, probably. Yep. Probably 3 inches worth of him.
Yeah. So I feel like it's exactly what Neil was saying. It's basically they want to cut off his influence from history. They don't have a problem with the fact that he existed 2,000 years ago as a man, but he existed, he lived, he died, and they want to cut it off there. And therefore, there's no influence of his that stretches throughout all of history that you can lay over a timeline, that you can see acts of Jesus, or you can see things that echo throughout the rest of human history. You know, they want to cut off the idea of his influence, is what I feel like it's saying. And it's black and white, so it represents the past. It represents probably an ancient group, not necessarily a modern group, but a group of people that have gotten together even back in past times that have said, this is what we want to do. We want to sever the influence of Jesus from history. And I think the agenda that is clear, that first of all, it's a spiritual war, it's a spiritual battle. And they believe that they can't win if the influence of Jesus is felt throughout history. And so what they want to do is they want to literally shadow ban Jesus. They want to cut him out of the picture, completely out of the picture. And then you just have a long picture with a bunch of timelines on it, you know, so it doesn't echo. His influence isn't felt. He isn't seen as the head, the alpha, the omega. You know, there's so much about Jesus and even the Father that he talks about that is about time, past, present, future, was, is to come, alpha, omega, you know, all these things that give us the comfort of knowing that Jesus is throughout the span of our lifetime, but even beyond that, throughout the span of all of history, and that his hands in particular and his influence and his blood is felt through all of human history. And if they can cut that out, then he's just a man that lived and died, and then they can do whatever they want, and they can not necessarily feel bad about the atrocities that they commit. It's, you know, things like that.
Also, in recent time, the one way that they've cut Jesus out of the timeline is, you know, when we were growing up, it was before Christ and after death.
Yeah. Now
Now it's before the Common Era, and I don't know what the other direction is, but they've taken Christ out of that as the focal point for our modern day, for any time going backwards or forwards. He was the focus of it, but now it's just some random, generic name that took him right out of it. So,
well, I think they understand the importance. I mean, in the midst of trying to rid Jesus of history, they're doing nothing more than ensuring his place, because they're by issue of the fact that they feel like they have to deal with the Jesus question. They're cementing his importance and his place. And I guarantee this, Satanists and Luciferians well know the influence of Jesus. And as much as they wish they could just write him off, cut him out of the picture, and not worry about him anymore, they absolutely know that they can't do that. And then they live in fear and trembling of the judgment that's coming, but they also live in fear and trembling of praying Spirit-filled Christians, because they can't, their spells and witches and magic and, warlockery cannot compete on any level with a born-again, Spirit-filled Christian who knows how to do warfare and who understands who he is.
Yep.
That's what's felt throughout history, is the followers of Jesus. And that's what they would want to see cut off, because if it wasn't for the followers of Jesus, you just look at America in particular, what would happen, God forbid, just with this country without the followers of Jesus.
It's interesting that they took a picture of the cross and a timeline, because the cross is really the pivot point of all of history, forwards and backwards. And specifically, one word upon which all of history pivots is the last word that he said was tetelestai, or the debt is finished, the debt is paid. And at that moment, Scripture was fulfilled. The debt has been paid for all the sins that have been committed, past and forward.
Yep.
And upon that, all history pivots. And so that's the beginning of the timeline, modern timeline. And they know that. And if they can remove that from history books and from our view, we pay less attention to what we really need to pay attention to. So, interesting dream.
Yep.